Okay, in the past, I've admitted that my channel doesn't have much of a direction. It's about whatever catches my interest in any given moment. So, what world-shaking subject has captured my attention this time? Time travel. And that's time travel as a genre of fiction. It's timely right now because a lot of people are discussing the limitations of time travel on account of Avengers Endgame. Now, I'm not going to discuss Endgame because I haven't seen it. I don't watch Marvel movies. I love old comics. I do not enjoy these movies. I do, however, enjoy a good time travel story. If I had the time and the inclination, I could probably put together a half a dozen or more examples of movie fans killing the concept of time travel. I'm only going to use one example. It's really all I need because the point of this video is not to defeat anyone else's ideas. I just want to illustrate another theory, even if I'm running the risk of being an immature sort of science fiction fan. I want to explain how a time travel story can set up rules that allow the past to be changed. Those who prefer strict borders to their fantasies will not be pleased.
The particular type of time travel utilized in Endgame is the alternate timeline branch point time travel, as opposed to closed-loop time travel. Allow me to explain the difference between the two. Closed-loop time travel is just as it sounds. There is one continuous timeline. You travel back in time from today, 2019, to let's say the 1950s, and you kill your own grandfather. You instantly disappear as you could never have existed because your grandfather was killed before you could have been born. Although, how could you have actually gone back in the first place if you killed your own grandfather? This is called the grandfather paradox. So let's say you used the closed-loop time travel model to do something much less destructive. Let's say you time traveled back into last week and gave your past self the winning lottery numbers. Your past self takes those numbers, plays the lottery and wins, and then you travel back to the present day. You return to find that your world has changed. You've literally changed your own timeline by changing the past. You return to the current week, but now you're a millionaire.
That sounds good. Yeah, it allows authors and readers to entertain one of the most fascinating speculations in fiction. What would happen if you could change the past?
In closed-loop time travel, the past you changed is connected to the future you just arrived from, and when you return to that future, it will be different after the changes you made. So how does this differ from branch point time travel? Well, branch point time travel is actually a bit more logical. In this theory, if you go back in time and kill your grandfather in the distant past, nothing will change. You won't disappear. You can even return to your own future and find that nothing is different. You never killed your grandfather in your own timeline because when you went back in time, you actually created a new alternate timeline just by dint of being there. Likewise, in this model, if you went back to last week and gave yourself the lottery numbers and then returned to the present, you'd find that nothing would have changed. You still wouldn't be a lottery winner because you merely gave the lottery numbers to a past version of yourself from an alternate timeline.
Well, that sucks. What was it?
Alternate timeline branch point time travel.
And that's robbed this hypothetical time traveler of a fortune. And it's committed a much greater crime than that. It has robbed all of us of that wonderful fantasy notion, the ability to change the past. This idea is not new to me at all. I've known about it for a very long time, and it was Marvel Comics that introduced the notion to me. Marvel 2-in-1, issue number 50, was published back in 1979. I was only 3 years old, so I didn't read it that year, but I was a kid when I read it. In that issue, Ben Grimm, the Thing, travels back in time. He has a cure for his condition that would have only worked at an earlier stage of his mutation. So he travels back in time, meets his younger self, encounters some difficulty, then administers the cure. He returns to his own time only to find that he is still the Thing. Mr. Fantastic explains it. Your past is immutable. Any change you make in the past results in another reality, a new one caused by your presence. Even as a kid, I felt a bit cheated by that. This idea has become annoyingly popular. Science fiction fans have a real tendency to think inside the box. There are only two options, one that can't work, and one that places limitations on time travel so strict that it becomes practically useless. Making it worse, I've heard a hell of a lot of science fiction fans insist that alternate timelines are the only kind of time travel that can be believed. How limiting. No stories about changing the past. No stories about the consequences. We need to apply the most drab and mature perspective we can to our science fiction. The immutability of history is so sacred that it cannot be infringed even as a hypothetical in a work of fiction. I can imagine being a time travel author who wants to write a story about changing the past, only to be told that alternate realities are the only kind of acceptable time travel stories. What would happen if you could change the past? You can't. The end.
Taking all the fun out of the job.
Now, good old Dave doesn't make that assertion. The most he said about alternate timeline theory was this.
Branch point time travel is actually a bit more logical.
He's not supposed to be an example of the rabid fan who needs his science fiction to follow particular rules. I'm using his video for two reasons. The first is that I decided to make this video while watching his. The other is that his explanations make it very easy for me to illustrate a different theory. Here's my example. Paradox Eclipse. It's an ebook available from Amazon, a novel that very few people have read. Now, some of you already know this, but some of my subscribers might be surprised to find out that my name is not Nick. Nick's Radio is just the name of my channel. My real name is Matthew Brown. Yeah, that's me. So I'm not just defending the genre as a fan. I'm defending my own work. Like I said, this is a time travel story that does allow its characters to alter the past with their time machines. The time machines in Paradox Eclipse can't be used to move to just any point in time. They require two machines, a sender and a receiver. Anything that is on the sender when it is activated will be transported to the receiver, whether that's in the future or the past. The scientists who create the machines experiment with them thoroughly before they put them to any real use. One of their experiments is called the Wineglass Test. They open a receiver first, so that it's waiting for the signal from the future. Then, later on, a wine glass is placed on the sender so that it will appear on the receiver in the past. At that point, there are two identical wine glasses, one that belongs in the present moment, and another that is from the future. What will happen if the present moment's wine glass is shattered? That's the experiment. Does the wine glass from the future vanish, since the present one can't be sent back? Does it shatter the way its past version shatters? Neither. It remains as it is, whole and pristine, defying causality. So the scientists learn that objects and people sent backwards in time retain their own histories, regardless of what happens to their counterparts. Some science fiction enthusiasts will cry foul. You can't just leave the wine glass intact. That doesn't make sense. So I'll try that again using two examples that Dave has provided. First, let's run the infamous grandfather paradox to see how that would resolve. Now, I'm not about to kill my own grandfather for your amusement, so I'll have to be the grandfather. I'll open a receiver and leave it waiting for a signal from the distant future. Not long after that, I will win the love of a famous musician and test pilot who is a former centerfold worth millions, and we will have a son. 25 years later, he will have his own son, giving me the grandson that I need for this. Then 25 years after that, the ungrateful whelp decides to kill me before his father is conceived. I don't understand his motives, but that's not really important. He sets a sender to the proper signal, gets on, and travels backward in time 50 years. So here we are at the beginning of the experiment, before I've had any children at all. I imagine I'm pretty surprised at the appearance of this young stranger. And there it is, the grandfather paradox. After my murder, what happens to my grandson? He does not vanish. He remembers his entire life, including his decision to travel back in time. And now he wants to return to his own time. What will he find when he returns to the future? Well, in a subplot that you're going to have to take on faith, he leaves instructions for a receiver to be opened in 50 years. Then he gets on a sender and travels to his own time. It's 50 years in the future. He still has not changed. He didn't change when he traveled backwards. He didn't change when he killed me. He doesn't change when he arrives in his own time in the future. But that future is changed. No one knows who he is. He was never born. His father was never born. There is no record of his existence. There is no family fortune waiting for him. Nothing. And the ungrateful little bastard hasn't even solved our problem. Why is this happening? How can he still exist in a future where his father was never born? Be patient. One more example will clear it up.
Let's say you time traveled back into last week and gave your past self the winning lottery numbers.
I'll get to live through this experiment, but I'm not going to enjoy it, even with the money. Today, I'll set a receiver. Next week, I'll look up the lottery numbers I need to win. Then I'll set a sender so that I can go backwards. Hello, future Matthew. Hello, past Matthew. I have the winning lottery numbers. Run out and get a ticket. Sure thing, but first let's send you back to the future.
If you went back to last week and gave yourself the lottery numbers and then returned to the present, you'd find that nothing would have changed. You still wouldn't be a lottery winner.
Yes, I am. I am now a lottery winner. I am living in a future where I am rich. And there were no ugly consequences to it. Well now, I wouldn't say that. There were two versions of Matthew in the past. There are now two versions of Matthew in the future. The version of Matthew from the past went out and bought his lottery ticket. And what was supposed to happen to him? Was he just supposed to vanish? Well, he didn't. He was not displaced by the man who traveled back to the future. Instead, the Matthew from the past lived through the week moment by moment. And he's still here, a man who got information from the future to become a millionaire. When the time-traveling version of Matthew reappeared, there was no reason that the two of them couldn't exist in this moment the same way they did before. And that's the problem with time travel in Paradox Eclipse. It creates duplicates. Let me get rid of all this. There. Now, this version of time travel is similar to, what was it again?
Closed loop time travel.
Yeah, that. It resembles that because you are not moving from one timeline to an alternate timeline. Any changes you make do affect history. This method of time travel also resembles
Alternate timeline branch point time travel.
It doesn't create an alternate branch of time for the entire universe, though. It only creates an alternate branch of time for the things sent through time. This is a time travel theory that allows changes to the past, and in my opinion, it's actually more reasonable than the alternate timeline theory. That's if I measure the time machines by their byproducts. The byproduct of the Paradox Eclipse machines can be a wine glass, a car, a piece of fruit, or even a person.
So how does this differ from branch point time travel? When you went back in time, you actually created a new alternate timeline.
You created an alternate timeline. Mr. Fantastic said something similar 40 years ago. When time travel is used in their scenario, the byproduct is an entire universe. Not a wine glass or a person, a universe. The Paradox Eclipse time machines don't have the power to duplicate universes, and that sounds more reasonable to me. It also creates a valid time travel theory that allows us to play with the idea of actually altering the past, with all the rewards and consequences of those alterations. Oh, and don't worry about the lottery failure. The machines can be used to win the lottery. You just have to know how. You have to think about what you're doing. The scientists in the story, they don't win the lottery, but they do make money with the machines. For the most part, they do it with infallible short-term investments. It's simple. You don't send yourself back in time to be duplicated. Instead, you send back a written note with the information needed to make the money. Then you aren't duplicated. There will still only be one of you with a single history. An altered history, but a single history. Well, thanks for watching, and if you're curious enough to read it, there's a link in the description to the book Paradox Eclipse. So I'll see you next time. Or, maybe I'll see you last time.